and welcome to the 2013 NHL Awards Show. I'm your host, Allison Steinheiser. Alongside me is Scott Majesky and Andy Hughes. And guys, we already did our playoff picks. Now we're going to get into some of the awards around the NHL. So the first one we're going to take a look at is the Lady Byng Award. And most of us have pretty standard picks, but Scott, you have a little bit of a different pick.
Yes, I did. I went with a different pick. I'm going with Patrick Kane from the Chicago Blackhawks for the Lady Byng Award. I was reading articles, looking around for who the Lady Byng nominees for, and Patrick Kane's actually down in the penalty minutes department this season. He's playing a lot better, getting the assists up. They're saying he's playing a lot more sportsmanship-like hockey out there on the ice, and hey, man, that's what this award is, and sportsmanship for Patrick Kane right there. I think he's growing out of the child that he was in Buffalo, and now he's becoming an actual hockey player, and it's showing. He's playing very well this season.
Yeah, we'll certainly give credit to Patrick Kane. He's at least growing out of it. My pick was Martin St. Louis from the Tampa Bay Lightning. He's kind of a standard candidate every year, but since he isn't really getting any consideration for the Hart, he already won the Art Ross. This is kind of like a consolation prize for him, for me at least. So I do have Martin St. Louis. He had a fantastic season with the Lightning, along with Steven Stamkos, and this guy just has a great story. Such a small player, but he's just so consistent, such a great player. He's been a great player for Tampa Bay for a long time. So I'll go with Martin St. Louis.
The Lady Byng Trophy, which is for sportsmanship, I went with Pavel Datsyuk, another player that you normally hear in the conversation. I just think he's such a dynamic player. He's respected by everybody throughout the league, and I think he's going to take it home again. Not only are we going to share our picks, but throughout the show, we're going to be showing picks from the rest of the CUTV crew. And when they weighed in, here were their choices. Matt Reed. That was a choice. He is very low in penalty minutes. Creighton, Jonathan Tavares, a good choice as well that I think he'll get some attention. And Zach, of course, Martin St. Louis, like you said. So some interesting picks in there, but you'll see some more interesting picks throughout the show. Moving on, we're going to go for the award for perseverance, the Masterton Award. Last year we talked in the show, we thought it was going to be runaway Sidney Crosby, but one person came back and has really overcome a lot this past year.
Yeah, there's been a lot of players that have overcome a lot this season. I'm going with the Toronto Maple Leafs goaltender and John Reimer for the Masterton Award. I like the pick. I was seeing a lot of articles about him, really supporting him for the pick. And, hey, man, Toronto's in the playoffs this year. It'd be a good story to see because it's the hockey mecca of the North America up there in Toronto. Expect Toronto to get some hardware this year out of the NHL Awards.
Yeah, that's certainly a good pick. I think Sidney Crosby was a good nominee, but I think Josh Harding from the Minnesota Wild is a candidate. It was hard for me not to vote for this guy. A guy that was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and came back and recorded a shutout. Even got the start last night for the Wild in their playoff game. Nicholas Backstrom injured in warm-ups. He gets the start, did a fantastic job. So I got to give it to Josh Harding. He didn't play a lot of games, but just to come back and have some success, definitely worth it for the Masterton.
I agree. I think Josh Harding is going to be the runaway winner. There are definitely a lot of players that came back from injuries, but Josh Harding, what he has done for everybody in the MS community, really gaining attention for that disease and the prevention of it. And he's been very adamant that he doesn't want any sympathy for it. He's just another player, and that's why I picked him as my Masterton winner. And several of the other people on CUTV did as well. Zach, you see with Sidney Crosby, another good choice. And Tyler, Patrick Kane, I think that's somebody else that you may see as one of the nominees because, Scott, as you alluded to earlier, he has really matured and come back from his childish ways, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and the Josh Harding and Sidney Crosby, I think, are your two front runners in that. The Reimer might make a good case for Toronto as well. I think Patrick Kane, just because of what happened with Josh Harding and Sidney Crosby, that Harding, I think, will be your winner, but I'm giving love to the Toronto goaltender.
Moving on to the best defensive forward, the Selke Trophy. Andy, who did you have for that?
I picked Jonathan Toews from the Chicago Blackhawks. I mean, he's another guy who you could throw into the Hart race. I think Jonathan Toews had a great year. He hasn't been nominated much for this award, at least one of the finalists. We've seen this award be handed out to the same people every single year. So I like what Jonathan Toews did. He's a great defensive forward, obviously great offensively too. But I'm going to go with Toews. He's had a great year. And he's going to be a huge part of the Blackhawks playoff push.
Andy, we are in agreement on that one. I think Jonathan Toews will take it away from Pavel Datsyuk this year. And, you always see Datsyuk up for it as well. And we always saw it from Pittsburgh perspective that Jordan Stahl would have got
this year.
But not this year. But I think Jonathan Toews is your Selke Award winner.
Completely agree with both of you. I think Jonathan Toews is going to be your Selke Award winner. He's kind of taken a backseat to Patrick Kane a little bit with the offensive numbers, but defensively what he's done for that team has been absolutely incredible, especially because he's getting older, but he's not all that old. He's still considered a younger player in the league. Some of the other people picked some different players. Jonathan Toews, you see on there, Pavel Datsyuk, another one. Clinton Logan, Pascal Dupuis, who I really, really, really wanted to pick as well, and I think it's a smart choice. I don't think he's going to win it. He was top in the league plus-minus during the regular season, so that's a good pick as well. Moving on, the next trophy is the Ted Lindsay Award, voted on by the members of the NHLPA for most valuable player on the year. Who do you have, Scott?
I have Alexander Ovechkin, Allison, from the Washington Capitals, mainly for his play in these final couple of months and leading the Capitals to their number 3 seed in the playoff in the Eastern Conference, just because of the way he's just been able to explode in these past couple months and really lead the Washington Capitals to the postseason.
Yeah, Ovechkin's a good pick. I went with the other guy, number 87, Sidney Crosby. Obviously had a great season. Took 25 games for him to lose that scoring lead. And you always hear everybody say, he's the best player in the game no matter what. I mean, John Tavares was quoted this morning saying that. So I don't know. I think he's really respected by his peers. Maybe not on the ice, but, I mean, these guys have a lot of respect for Crosby. I think they'll vote for Sid this year.
I completely agree with you. I think Sidney Crosby's going to win this award because of what you said, is it took them so long to catch up to him in points, and a lot of guys didn't catch up to him. So I really think that even though Ovechkin did have a great second half of the year, Sidney Crosby's going to come away with it just because he has so much respect on the ice, and most players that have given interviews have said he is the best player in the game right now. Looking at some of the other people, Clint picked Patrick Kane. Creighton at Steven Stamkos, another good pick that could get interesting. Some people will say he didn't make the playoffs, that's why he might not get votes, but he may get votes. Zach agrees with you. Alex Ovechkin, and Tyler's with Andy and I with Sidney Crosby. Our next award is the Calder Cup, and it is for Rookie of the Year. Scott, why don't you go ahead and start, because I know this is your favorite player.
Nail Yakupov from the Edmonton Oilers will win the Calder Cup. Well, from my perspective, I would hope he'd win the Calder Cup, because I want him to go up on stage and have a mad celebration when he wins the trophy for the Calder Cup. Nail Yakupov, I loved him as the number 1 overall pick, and I think he's going to be a great player in the future for the Edmonton Oilers. And that Edmonton team, watch out next year. I think they'll make the playoffs for sure. But Nail Yakupov, I just want him to have a mad celly on the stage, that's all.
He's a very exciting player.
Yes,
I love the celebrations myself. Thought it brought a lot of excitement to the game, I thought. I went with a guy from the Florida Panthers. Panthers obviously didn't have a good season this year. I went with Jonathan Huberdeau. He's a guy that I thought was going to have a good year this year, and he did. I feel like he's not going to get as much consideration just because of the jersey he wears.
Yeah.
But he turned into a big leader for that Panthers team, because they lost a lot of guys to injury. Sean Bergenheim, Christopher Stieg. I mean, they had a ton of guys that were injured throughout the season. He kind of stepped up as a rookie. So I'll go with Jonathan Huberdeau for the Calder.
I had to stick with the local kid, Brandon Saad. I think he is going to get a lot of consideration as well, and I've seen a couple ballots, and he's been at the top of quite a few. But we all had 3 different ones, and there are a lot of rookies this year. I heard some reporters saying that this is one of the toughest rookie classes to pick the Calder Trophy for, and that's why you'll see a couple of different nominees on here as well. Brendan Gallagher, another good player for Montreal, helped lead his team into the playoffs. That's who Creighton has. Zach and Tyler agree with you, Andy. Jonathan Huberdeau, and you have the lone Nail Yakupov, as Clint agrees with me, with Brandon Saad, but we'll have to see, because any of those guys could really win that trophy.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the hardest Calders in a while. It's very hard.
Next up is the Jack Adams Award for Coach of the Year. And Andy, who did you have for that?
Well, I went with Paul McLean from the Ottawa Senators. Certainly, man, what a tough year. I mean, they lost Erik Karlsson, they lost Jason Spezza, then they lost Craig Anderson, who was having a great year, and somehow this team slipped into the playoffs. I honestly didn't think they would. So the mustached man, Paul McLean, he has been fantastic all season long, and we'll see what they can do in the playoffs. But just to get into the playoffs with so many injuries, so many crucial injuries, in my opinion, he deserves this award. And you saw Dan Bylsma win this award after Crosby and Malkin got hurt, and they got into the playoffs. So similar situation this year with the Ottawa Senators.
Joe Quenneville from the Chicago Blackhawks is my choice. On the hot seat going into this season, and now look where he is at the end of it. In the playoffs as the number 1 seed out of the West, President's Trophy winner. They already took Game 1 over the Minnesota Wild. Joe Quenneville is my pick for the Jack Adams just because, man, he was on the hot seat. Everyone thought if he has a bad start, he's gone. Well, he had a pretty good start to the season there in Chicago.
For my pick, I went with Randy Carlyle just because this Toronto team from the beginning was set up to fail based on all the drama that was going on in the front office. He didn't let it affect them. They were able to make the playoffs, and I just think he did a great job this year in helping his team finally get over that hump and make the playoffs. Some of the other people, Joe Quenneville, another big one. Creighton had Dan Bylsma, another good pick, and so did Tyler Zach with Michelle Therrien, which I think is an interesting pick as well because Montreal, another one of those teams you didn't think was going to do very much this year, and he was able to lead them to a division win. Yeah,
I wasn't expecting much out of Montreal, but Michelle Therrien's really good as far as accountability goes, makes his players accountable. So I thought about him as well, but that's a good pick.
The next trophy we're going to talk about has caused a little bit of controversy this whole year, the Norris Trophy. Yeah. A lot of people have been going back and forth between a couple of players. Scott, who did you decide on?
With P.K. Subban from Montreal, the Canadiens, a defenseman. I think P.K. Subban's one of the better up-and-coming players in this league. And it is a tough one because now that Nicholas Lidstrom's out of this league, it's going to be tough to see who's actually going to start winning the Norris Trophy and getting that consistent string going. I think P.K. Subban's your next guy that's going to start getting that string of winning the Norris Trophy, and it starts this year. Yeah, and this was a weird year for the Norris because obviously you don't have Nick Lidstrom. Then Erik Karlsson, the reigning winner, gets injured. So that kind of allows some of the younger guys to get an opportunity. I also went with P.K. Subban. Chris Letang also had a great year. Ryan Suter had a great year. But I think P.K. Subban is a very, very physical guy. In addition, obviously he has a great slap shot. He can get some points as a defenseman, but he brings that physical edge to this Montreal Canadiens team. And I don't know if they would be where they are without him. So I'll go with P.K. Subban. I went with Chris Letang. I was debating between Letang and Subban for quite a while, but I went with Chris Letang purely because they tied for points, I believe, first overall among defensemen, and Letang played in less games. Yeah. Yes, he's probably not going to get some votes because he did miss a pretty big chunk of a shortened season, but he played very well for the Penguins, and he's better defensively than a lot of people give him credit for. So I think those are going to be your top 2 nominees, Letang and Subban, and those were pretty much the top 2. As you see, Clint, Creighton, Zach, and Tyler all went with Chris Letang as well. But P.K. Subban, I don't know who's going to win between those two. I think it's going to be very close. Yeah, it is. And P.K. Subban didn't start the year because of his whole contract thing. So obviously he was working hard. He jumped right back into the lineup and had a great season. So put that into consideration as well. I think you'll see those two fighting for the Norris Trophy for the next few years in the NHL. Our next one we're going to talk about is the Vezina Trophy, best goaltender, and some of these goalies played incredible this year. Bobrovsky was one of them. Who's your nominee, Scott? Well, you just said his name, Allison. Bobrovsky from the Columbus Blue Jackets, mainly because I think his almost push into the playoffs would have, I think, sealed the deal for the Vezina for him. Now it's kind of be a little bit tricky to see if he actually can get the Vezina award. But Sergei Bobrovsky, wow, a backup in Philadelphia now making his name in Columbus for a team that no one thought would even be close to making the playoffs, and they just missed it by a point. Yeah, I would agree. I'm going with Sergei Bobrovsky as well. I didn't expect much out of Columbus. They got rid of Rick Nash. You're thinking, this is a rebuilding team, and all of a sudden they make a huge playoff push. And I always knew that Columbus could be a good hockey market if they had a good team, and they were showing that towards the end of the season. There, they had pretty loud crowds. So I think Sergei Bobrovsky was a huge part of that. He was outstanding all year, and I think he kind of put hockey back on the map in Columbus. We'll see if it continues next season, but no one saw the success that Columbus had this season. It's a shame they didn't make the playoffs, but they came really, really close because of Bobrovsky. The difference between my vote was whether Columbus made the playoffs or not. Bobrovsky would definitely be my number 1 Vezina candidate if they had made the playoffs. Because they didn't, I went with Antti Niemi because of what he did for the Sharks this year. I know there were some reporters on the West Coast saying if Niemi doesn't win the Vezina, it's because the people on the East Coast don't realize how good of a goaltender he is.
He was the best goaltender throughout most of this year with save percentage, goals against average, and wins. And he just had an absolutely incredible season. Now, can he do it in the playoffs? That's a question that is yet to be answered. Taking a look at some of the other ones, you see Bobrovsky, a very common candidate there, with Creighton and Zach both picking him, and Clint with Marc-Andre Fleury, an interesting pick. I think he missed a little bit of he did miss a little bit of time with injury. I think if he had played the whole year the way he was at the beginning of the year, that he would be a more solid candidate now. But just he's another great goalie that we talked about it during our playoff preview show. You're probably going to see contending for Team Canada again.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, the next award we're going to take a look at, one of the most debated awards, is the Hart Trophy. It looked like it was going to be a runaway winner on, I think, March 30th or 31st, and then
Things changed.
Things changed very, very quickly. Scott, who did you go with?
Jonathan Toews from the Chicago Blackhawks. Best record in the regular season over there in Chicago. Jonathan Toews also put him a good amount of points. Also wears the C for Chicago, too. I think that's a reason why he's very high in the nominations for the Hart Trophy. I like Jonathan Toews. I always have. I think he's competing to wear a letter for Team Canada if the NHL players are allowed to next Olympics. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's a hard candidate for the captain of Canada along with 87.
Yep, and that's my pick, 87. Went back and forth with this one. I think there was probably 3 or 4 good candidates in this one, but I know Sid missed a lot of the year, but just so dominant. Like we said earlier, it took 25 days for him, to lose that scoring lead. And he's not a bad defensive player. He's certainly a guy that works really hard. And honestly, I think it depends on how you define most valuable player. I mean, I think there's a lot of different definitions from different people out there. So you think of not only the on the ice stuff, but off the ice. I mean, Crosby was a guy who maybe the Penguins don't have, a Ginla, Morrow, and all those guys. I mean, he's kind of like a recruiting chip almost in some ways. Maybe the Penguins don't have the new arena without Crosby. So I'm kind of looking at other stuff in addition to his on-ice performance. So that's kind of why I'm picking Crosby in this situation.
I really, really wanted to go with Sidney Crosby, but I did not because he missed so much time. If he plays, even if he misses 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I think he still gets it. But I went with Patrick Kane because I basically looked at the list, the scoring list. That's normally how it's judged a lot of times. I'm not going to put in somebody that didn't lead their team to the playoffs, so that eliminates St. Louis and Stamkos. I'm not going to put in somebody that missed the big chunk of the year, Crosby. I'm not going to put in somebody that, in my opinion, was brutal for half the year and played well for the other half of the year. That eliminates Ovechkin. And Patrick Kane, I felt, was the one player that from game 1 to game 48 was consistently good. He didn't have very many off days. He didn't have an off week, which you can't have in a shortened season, and that's difficult. I really feel like him going over and playing in Europe helped him because it helped him mature, and you've seen that on his game on the ice. So that is why I picked Patrick Kane for the Hart Trophy. Take a look at the rest of them. Jonathan Toews, Sidney Crosby. A lot of Sidney Crosbys on there. Clint had Jonathan Toews. Gary, Creighton, Zach, and Tyler all went with number 87, Sidney Crosby. And it will be interesting to see how that injury really affects the voting because I think you're right. For the majority of the year, it was Sidney Crosby and no one else.
Easily. And you throw in John Tavares as well. He's another guy that's a good candidate. Like we said in our previous show, the Islanders weren't expected to make the playoffs, and Tavares was a huge part of that. So he's definitely a guy who you could consider for the Hart as well.
That is all of our individual trophies. Now we're going to move on to the team trophies. The Campbell Bowl for Western Conference winners, winning the Western Conference in the playoffs. Scott, you are the lone pick that is not the Chicago Blackhawks. So who do you have and why? I'm sorry, there's one more, but go ahead.
The Anaheim Ducks I have in the Campbell Cup, and I think Clinton Logan's also the other one with the Anaheim Ducks, but can't really remember if that's his pick or not. The Anaheim Ducks, I think they're very good this year. They already took game 1 in their first series against Detroit, and they played very well in that. I just really like the Anaheim Ducks. They remind me of a very veteran team out there. They're playing smart. They're playing together, team hockey. And don't forget about their goalie, Jonas Hiller. He's playing pretty darn good hockey. And, if he can make a playoff run, you got Teemu Selanne, Perry. I like this team. I think they're going to do well.
Yeah, that's certainly a good pick. And I went with the Chicago Blackhawks, like Allison said. I think most of us did. Had a great regular season. I had that huge winning streak towards the beginning of the season. they needed to lose, and they did, and they had to have some type of adversity to get through the playoffs. So, and I think they will. They have so much speed and so much skill. We'll see how the goaltending holds up. That'll be crucial for their run. But I just think this team has too much talent, and I think they'll come out of the West.
I completely agree with you. I have Chicago because of the amount of talent, although they made me a little bit nervous in game one
a little bit.
with the way that they played. But they're going to hit some bumps in the road, but I really think Chicago, just talent is going to prevail. They're going to be too strong and too much for any team to be able to handle in a 7-game series. Taking a look at some of these picks, you see Chicago, Anaheim, Chicago, Minnesota for Zach Lamar, Chicago for Tyler. And I asked Zach earlier this week, why did you pick the 8th seed Minnesota? And he said that Zach Parise and Ryan Suter were too strong and that he thought that the goaltending was going to help one out as well. So we'll have to see. That's a pretty bold pick to make. I mean, the two of us predicted upsets last year that the Kings were going to win, but there's a big difference between upsetting Vancouver and upsetting the Blackhawks.
I don't think two players make a big difference in hockey like they might do in the NBA.
Yeah.
It's a team game.
Yeah, it's a team sport. It's all about it. Because like LeBron James and Dwayne Wade can make a big difference in the NBA, but Ryan Suter and Zach Parise, they're not out on the floor or in the ice as much as an NBA player is.
Yeah, and you gotta have four good lines, and then 6 good defensemen. You gotta have good goaltending. So there's a lot more than just 2 players in the hockey playoffs here.
And if Zach's wrong, he's going to make us look like a bunch of idiots.
That's for sure.
Or if Zach's right, he's going to make us look like a bunch of idiots. But we'll have to see. So, Zach, pressure's on you. You better hope your Minnesota Wild find a way to beat the Blackhawks to begin with, and that would be an impressive feat. Moving on to the Eastern Conference, the Prince of Wales Trophy. Scott, you had a different team as well for this one. You had different than Andy and I for most of the picks.
Yeah, I have the Boston Bruins, ladies and gentlemen, coming out of the Eastern Conference. I really like this Boston team. I really think they're going to make a run in this Eastern Conference. They're going to lift up the city of Boston and rally around them, take them into the Stanley Cup Finals to face those Anaheim Ducks. Because I like Boston. I really like this Boston Bruins team, and they have that team mentality. I really think that they're just deep all around. And I even know the Pens played and beat them pretty much all regular season. Those two teams match up in the Eastern Conference Finals. Ooh, what a Eastern Conference Finals that'd be.
Yeah, I'd like to see that happen. I think that would be a really good series there. I did go with the Penguins, though. I think the depth. I mean, we talked about it previous show, how the 4 lines. I mean, you could have UC Jokinen possibly as your 4th line center. You could have Bo Bennett on the 4th line. There's just a ton of talent on this team. And then look at the defense. You can kind of match the defenseman with the opponent. I mean, you could have more physical defenseman and maybe a team that isn't too good with getting hit, or if you need puck moving defenseman, the Penguins have that with Simone Dupre, guys like that. They can just throw him in there. So, and obviously they have Thomas Foucault and Marc-Andre Fleury, 2 great goaltenders. Both of them could easily start on an NHL team. So, just think there's too much depth here, and I think the Penguins come out of the East.
I agree. I think the Penguins come out of the East as well, and a reason why is whenever you build a hockey team, you want to build down the middle, and that is what Ray Shero has done, starting with his goaltenders out to his defensemen, and of course, the depth of his centermen is just absolutely incredible. You have Crosby, Malkin, Jokinen, Suter, you have Adams, Vitale can play center. So many people that can really step into any role and play, and I really think UC Jokinen may be the reason the Penguins are able to go on a run, barring injuries. As you take a look at some of the other teams, Scott, you're all alone there. Pittsburgh taking the sweep from everybody else, but Bruins definitely going to be a team to contend with in the Eastern Conference. So moving on, the Stanley Cup champion for this year, Scott.
Ducks over Bruins in 6. I got the Anaheim Ducks beating the Boston Bruins in 6. I think Anaheim just a little bit better than the Boston Bruins if they'd match up in the Stanley Cup Finals, and I think Boston might be a little bit gassed out for a run when they get to the Stanley Cup Finals. Though, that being said, I still think the Western Conference is a lot tougher than the Eastern Conference in the playoffs. I still think Anaheim will still beat Boston in the end in 6.
No, that's certainly a good pick. I think the Penguins will beat the Blackhawks. I think it's going to go 7 games. I think that's going to be a great series. It's been my dream scenario. I hope it happens. Just a ton of talent on both of those teams, but I think the Penguins, with the kind of players that they got over the trade deadline, they're players with an edge, and I think that'll definitely help them. And all these players are looking for their first cup, so I think that'll motivate the team. I think the Penguins take the Stanley Cup.
I do as well. I think the Penguins are going to take the cup in 6 games, bring the first trophy back to Consol Energy Center, and finally win that Stanley Cup on home ice. But even if it only goes 6 games, I think it's going to be an absolutely incredible series should those two teams match up because of the talent on the ice. Just be absolutely incredible to see as you take a look at the rest of the winners. Once again, Scott, lone man standing with Anaheim. Everybody else picking the Penguins.
Wow.
All the way down the board there. So
no pressure, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the feeling around Pittsburgh, though, is Stanley Cup or bust. I mean, even right now, we're getting ready for Game 1 later on tonight, and there's an excitement in the air, but there's an expectation, too, that it's the Islanders. You should win fairly easily, and if you don't win the Cup, if you don't make it to the next round, it's almost a failure at this point.
Yeah. You load up. You have an all-star team pretty much on the ice right now, and if you lose in the first round, heck, I honestly think it's a Stanley Cup or bust for this team, and if they don't, it's a failure because you got that all-star team out there. There's no excuses for that team not to hoist the cup.
Yeah, and when you add guys like Jerome McGinley, Brendan Morrow, Douglas Murray, Jussi Jokinen, to a team that already has Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, the list goes on and on and on. I think it's a cup or bust. A lot of pressure for Mr. Dan Bilesma, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So, Andy, you just listed a whole bunch of star players on the Penguins. The last trophy that we have is the Conn Smythe Trophy. Yeah. Who do you think is going to take home that Hardwell?
Well, this guy was on the list. It's going to be Sidney Crosby. He's gone through a lot, obviously with the concussion, now with the broken jaw. Pretty much had the Hart Trophy before he got injured. I think he comes back with that chip on his shoulder. He's going to be really, really motivated to show that he can get back to that form once again. He wants that Stanley Cup, he does. So I think he's going to lead this team. He certainly has. If he does play with Jerome McGinley, we've seen him play with him in the Olympics. So I think those two can click if they do play with each other. And then Pascal Dupuis on that line probably as well. Those two have already had some success. So I'll go with Sidney Crosby.
Seeing as I have the Ducks over the Bruins, I'm going to go Teemu Selanne will be your Conn Smythe winner for the Anaheim Ducks. I think he's going to have himself one heck of a playoffs. The guy just keeps on getting older, but really he's still playing like he's 20 years old out there. Gotta love Teemu Selanne. I think that's who your winner's going to be. Though Getzlaf and Perry might make a run at it for that team as well, but I'm going to go the older guy in Selanne.
I have one question before I say my nominee. Do you think Teemu Selanne, if he wins the Conn Smythe Trophy and the Cup, do you think he retires?
Yeah, it'd probably be a good note to go off on, you'd think. But, I mean, if the guy thinks he can still play, he might still play. Gordie Howe didn't stop playing until, he was like 53 years old. If Teemu Selanne still thinks he can play and suit it up and get out of bed every morning and willing to go out there and play, he'll get up and play. But it's a shortened season, so he actually might have that rested form and got a couple more years. If he wins and gets the Conn Smythe, he'll be back. He'll be back.
Okay.
He's never going to stop retiring. Him and, Chelios never stopped playing.
Chelios never stopped either. Well, I went with Sidney Crosby once again. I completely agree with you, Andy. I think he's going to come back with a big chip on his shoulder, and we know how Sidney Crosby plays whenever he has some pressure, and he's not the happiest. He plays a lot better whenever he's playing with emotion. So I think you're going to see Sidney Crosby come back and lead the team, as does Andy. As I said, you have Teemu Selanne. Clint has Jussi Jokinen. Creighton, Jerome McGinley, another good pick, and Zach, James Neal. Any of those people really could win the Conn Smythe Trophy easily. Yeah,
certainly. I mean, James Neal, he's playing with Malkin. McGinley's playing with Crosby. Yeah. So, and obviously those are two guys that can set those guys up well. Malkin can set up Neal, and Sid can set up with McGinley. So those guys could certainly be putting some pucks in the net. So, I mean, obviously all those guys are good picks.
Well, that will do it for this show. Thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you for watching us over the years. We're all seniors and either have graduated or are graduating. This has been, I know, one of my favorite shows that we've done throughout the years. So we do appreciate you guys taking the time to watch it. For Scott Majesky, Andy Hughes, Clinton Logan, Kat Leberfinger, and Gloria Stone in the control room, I'm Allison Steinheiser. Have a nice night.